Hey everyone, it's Simi Shah, and welcome to Trailblazers. Through this series, we bring you trailblazing by South Asians and for South Asians. We're the torchbearers, sharing the stories of the leaders and innovators lighting the way across the South Asian diaspora. Today, I'm so thrilled to welcome Deepa Subramaniam to Trailblazers. Deepa currently serves as the first ever Chief Product and Digital Officer for the ACLU. The American Civil Liberties Union is a 100-year-old nonprofit with a membership exceeding 1.8 million people. Deepa has been a trailblazer in the digital product design and development space for going on 15 years. She has experience helping some of the world's most prominent organizations use design and technology to solve the world's biggest problems. She started her career at Adobe as a computer scientist and became the product lead for the company's Creative Cloud platform, its hallmark product. After more than a decade there, she left to join Charity Water, a nonprofit that provides clean water to populations in the developing world. Then came the 2016 election cycle. She left that role to join the Hillary for America campaign, where she led digital product development for the campaign's online fundraising and online policy platforms. Before landing her current role at the ACLU, Deepa actually served as VP of Product Design at Kickstarter, the renowned crowdfunding platform, and she also launched her own product management consulting practice, Wherewithal. If it isn't obvious, Deepa's life's work spans the gamut of digital product development in the creative and in the political, in the private and in the nonprofit. Most recently, and unsurprisingly, she was named to Fortune's 40 Under 40 list. Deepa, you are a tried and true trailblazer, and I could probably go on forever, but I'm just so thrilled to be catching up with you today.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad to be here. This is wonderful.
So I think the world of product is one that's a growing field, but it is also one that tends to be fairly nebulous. People don't fully understand what the role is, what it looks like. How did you go about figuring that out? How would you describe product to people who don't understand what that role looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I have to give that explanation regularly to folks who, if they are aware of the tech world, they definitely know what an engineer is or a designer, but a product manager is a little bit more nuanced. Maybe I'll first answer kind of like my role into product management and then how I sort of talk about it now and explain it to folks. So I actually started my career as an engineer, and that was at Macromedia and then at Adobe, and it was really wonderful. I really enjoyed being an engineer. However, I found joy in my days when I was both coding and talking to people, interacting with our customers, talking to the team, really like kind of hashing out and discussing what were, say, problems we were hearing from customers, and then kind of riffing off of that to develop solutions or innovations in the platform that we were building within the product team. So this was when I was working on a product called Flex, which is a Flash-based product that was used to build like rich desktop and mobile applications. This was at Macromedia. And so this was also kind of the early stages of when even the concept of product management was becoming a thing in the tech industry. And I didn't even we had a product manager on our team. He was amazing. I worked really closely with him. He would often bring me on sort of like customer calls and customer meetings. And I found it really invigorating.
And this was at Adobe?
Yeah, this was at Macromedia and then Adobe.
Oh, Macromedia, got it.
Adobe acquired Macromedia, during my time there. And so the then product manager of Flex moved on to a different role. And our GM at the time was like, you should become the next product manager of Flex. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. And that sounds really intimidating. And he was like, it's kind of what you're already doing now. You're listening to what our customers want and need, not just taking exactly what they ask for, but kind of, introspecting it and understanding what are the gaps in the product that exists, and then ideating on that with the team to figure out what are new things that we can build to continue to add value to our customers. It was like, Deepa, that's what a product manager does. And I was like, okay, I'm not sure about this, but, let's give it a go. And I think because I moved from being an engineer on the team to being a product manager, I really knew the product inside and out, and I kind of knew what was possible, like what was easy to build and whatnot. So that was sort of my foray. It was honestly like I fell sort of backwards into it because the role needed to be filled on the team. And then now looking back on it, it really was the perfect kind of role for me. I didn't get joy sitting in front of my computer for 12 hours a day coding. I got joy sitting in front of my computer, maybe like 3, 5, 6 hours a day coding, and then also having deep, meaningful conversations about what the product offered, what should the future be, blue sky innovation, clever fixes for, issues that needed workarounds, things like that. And then over time, I realized, I'm a technical product manager, because I definitely started off being much more comfortable in like the technical translation of issues. And then over my career as a product manager, so I went on at Adobe to then work as a product director on what was then Adobe's first effort at getting Creative Cloud out the door. So Adobe had been selling Creative Suite as shrink wrap software, doing great. I mean, multi-million-dollar business. And a small group of people, my GM really led this effort, was like, hey, what if we, instead of waiting 24 months to release the next version of Creative Suite, whenever any of our amazing products, Photoshop, After Effects, Lightroom, had a new feature, we just released it and our customers got it the second it was ready. And that was sort of the birth of a subscription-based product. Let's not, shrink wrap software, deliver it in sort of these like highly produced once in a while releases. Why don't we just make it available to everyone? You're getting it through the cloud. And when there's something new to offer in the product, you just get it as being a member of this like subscription-based product. So it was a brand new concept at the time and really a huge U-turn for Adobe to take. And this, Creative Cloud required convincing Wall Street, our board, 20 plus different product teams, that this business model and this distribution model was interesting and worth pursuing and could really unlock the next level of like happy users and a strong business for Adobe. And boy, was that correct. I mean, with the launch of Creative Cloud, Adobe has now been a huge market leader, Wall Street dominance. I mean, really incredible, in hindsight, very smart decision. So I went on to then lead product on like the first few, or not lead product, part of a very talented product team. But I worked on like the first sort of like download piece that you would get to get all the applications in Creative Cloud and things like that. So this was sort of when, as a product manager, I went from being just super technical to like also thinking about the business and, revenue models and looking at data to understand what our users were doing and where were they sort of falling off and translating that into improvements in the product and so on and so forth. So that was really my foray into product management, and I haven't really looked back since. So when people ask me, what is product? Like my mom asks me this all the time. She is an incredible, creative, artistic-minded person, not super technical. That's the realm of my father. And she was always like, what do you do? What is a product manager? And I was kind of explaining to her as, I'm sort of like the mom. I am trying to figure out what should this thing be? What do people want and need? And how do we give them that in a way that is secure and sustainable and delightful and, at a pace that we can keep meeting? So I was sort of like, Mom, when there's like a new release of software, if everyone is really excited and happy and satisfied with it, like I did good as the mom. Like I planned things really well and kind of gave them what they wanted.
That.
And if they're frustrated and angry and there's bugs and they're like, this is a waste of money, then I did a bad job as the mom of the product. And so it is a truly interdisciplinary role. You're absolutely correct. Like, it's not like people go to college and get like a bachelor's in product management. It is super interdisciplinary. You are part engineer, part designer, part marketer, part business developer, part legal, part data scientist. That really spoke to me, that interdisciplinary kind of approach where you were kind of savvy in a number of different fields. And it was all about how you synthesize that together to develop, a roadmap or sort of like a future for this product. And you had to be nimble. So it's a mixture of being both proactive and reactive. And I just really enjoyed all of that. So like product management has been the right fit for me. And I'm really glad I did that sort of U-turn away from engineering.
No, that's amazing. And it's also just very incredible to hear that there was so much reluctance in like the subscription-based model and the way that you did product feature rollouts, and how like normalized that is now in the way that we consume a lot of tech products.
You're totally right. Like that subscription-based idea, cloud delivery is so normalized now. You know, how many of us on our credit card statements is there our Hulu, our Netflix, our Dropbox, our Apple? It's just everything is there. But back then with Creative Cloud, it was sort of the first kind of foray at that. And I think we ourselves were pretty unsure how the market would respond, and saw our biggest challenge is convincing our current customers to move from Creative Suite to Creative Cloud. We didn't expect that migration would be much easier than we thought, and that by launching Creative Cloud with all these different price points, we got a whole new set of customers who, for them, the price point and packaging of Creative Suite was not as attractive as, hey, I'm like a hobbyist photographer. I'll get the like Photoshop Lightroom package for like $10 a month and really be happy with these products and stay a lifetime customer for quite a long time. So it was really, I learned so much during that experience, and like brought the power of subscription-based products into some of the future companies that I worked at.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just touched on what I was going to say. It sounds like you got a lot of your major and early education in product at Adobe. And then you made somewhat of a left turn by going to work in product at Charity Water. Can you talk about why you decided to make that leap?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I am so grateful for exactly like the early foundation and education I got at Macromedia and Adobe. I worked with some of the smartest, most thoughtful, empathetic engineers and business leaders at my time there. It's a company, I'm still close with so many people there. Really proud of my time at Adobe. I mean, 10 years is like a long time to be at a company.
Especially now.
It speaks to the quality of the company and the people and like the pride that we have in working there. It was really tough to leave. But basically what started happening was I was like, oh man, I'm going to hit 10 years at this company. And it was very clear my path there would continue sort of upwards, and there was so much room for growth and learning. Like it was a place where I could very happily have worked 30 years and retired and been very satisfied. But I felt very much like there were other challenges out there that could benefit from my like natural skills and interests. And I sort of felt that I would regret it if I never tried my hand at something different. And around the same time that I was thinking about, okay, what could be next? I was more interested in how technology was helping to solve some of these sort of global problems. This was sort of the birth of like Khan Academy, people being able to learn remotely on this platform, whether you live in Oakland, California or like Karachi, Pakistan. Like I was so interested by this intersection of like technology and solving some of these bigger, deeper problems that existed in the world. So not just in like the classic consumer enterprise tech sector, but like going beyond that. And around then was when I met Scott Harrison, the founder of Charity Water, an incredible, inspiring leader who had started Charity Water, which is a clean water nonprofit. Though a nonprofit, really feels, looks, acts like a startup. They are a nonprofit that basically raises money online and through major donors and foundations to invest that money into areas where there's access issues for clean water. And they work with local partners on the ground to build the right like clean water solutions. And the reality is, 785 million people around the world lack access to clean water. It is not just a health issue. It is a women's issue, a children's issue, like a societal equity issue, because it's often women and children who are the ones who, when a particular community or village doesn't have access to clean water, it's women and children who are walking to some dirty water source multiple times a day to bring water back for their cooking and drinking and cleaning, whatnot. So when you bring clean water into a community, you are giving hours back to women and children to maybe go into school or start a small business or, just be able to do more than just be carrying water back into their communities. So when I met Scott, he was really interested in bringing a head of product into the organization to sort of build upon their existing successes, which included an online fundraising platform, a direct donating platform, And really, Charity Water's strength was understanding the power of design and storytelling to bring an awareness to the clean water issue and inspire people to give. So that seemed to perfectly line up to kind of what I knew I could offer. It was a classic sort of product role, leading a product team, helping to bring in some more data science into the product decision making, working closely with engineers and designers, but in a domain that was completely new to me. The water, sanitation, health sector was something I knew very little about. So I like that mixture of comfort in that the role itself lined up well to what I knew I could do and could do well, but the domain was completely different. And I knew I would learn a lot in that regard. And that's actually, I think, a pattern in my career. My jump from then Charity Water to the Hillary campaign was similar. The role was exactly a role I knew how to do, director of product. That's pretty straightforward and one I felt very confident in. The domain, politics, a presidential campaign, completely different, and thus ripe for new learnings and insights and, a wild ride. So yeah. I think once I kind of U-turned out of classical tech, I found that really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to come back to your work on the Hillary for America campaign because it sounds absolutely incredible. But first, I want to touch on that U-turn and the fact that you're talking about that you operated in all these different domains. Something that I think a lot of young South Asians often struggle with is pursuing their interests in the public sector. There's a bit of a legacy push from parents and other figures to go into the private sector. Is that something that you struggled with? How did you navigate considering that aspect of the decision as you pursued these different roles beyond big tech at Adobe?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, when I started thinking about leaving Adobe and the career trajectory I was on at Adobe, I knew I would be met with a little bit of, resistance, but head scratching and confusion about it. And it was a little tricky. I was nervous about it, but I first started talking about it with my family, my parents. And, sometimes I think we don't give our families enough credit. As immigrants themselves, they also made dramatic, life-changing decisions at young ages to leave their home country and come to a completely different country and start anew. So they have a little bit of that adventuresome, seeking something different and better spirit in them. And so if you could kind of, tap into that, there is some common ground there. And yes, they always want your security, financial security, stability, but I think it's important to paint the picture of what you're trying to do and help them understand whether there is financial and career security in this new path that you're going on, and that it takes a little bit of extra dialogue. My parents totally know what an engineer at Google or Facebook or Adobe would do for the rest of their lives. For them to understand why a nonprofit would even need a product leader, much less what that would look like, required me to sort of help explain things to them and bring them along my own decision-making journey. And that really proved successful because when I decided to join Charity Water, not only was I leaving a very stable and lucrative path at Adobe, that also required moving from the Bay Area and leaving my family and moving to New York. And I sort of explained to them, this is why I feel this is important. This is what I hope to achieve. This is how I think this will be a stepping stone into future opportunities. And it was relatively easy. I have very kind, empathetic, understanding parents. Honestly, more so than convincing my family was, I think there were definitely members of my community who found the move so surprising and interesting. They were very proud of me. But I think a lot of people are you're leaving so much money on the table, this and that. And it's well, these are my values and this is what's motivating me. And I totally respect if that's different than the choices that you'd make, but you have to sort of own that choice and, spend as much effort as you're willing to help people understand that choice. But then at the end of the day, if they don't, that's okay. If you feel confident in what you're trying to do, excited and motivated by what you're trying to pursue, then that's sort of the most important thing. I really started at that point also developing really close friendships with other people in sort of the social good sector and just recognizing, oh my gosh, there's so many other people who share my interests and values and are taking sort of these leaps into different things and doing it, as confidently as possible. So that emboldened me a bit and made me feel like, okay, I'm not alone. And at the end of the day, pivoting back into the tech private sector is pretty much always on the table. I'm lucky that way. Like between my time at Adobe and my background and whatnot, like if I ever need to come back into the private sector, it's very easy to do so. So I sort of kind of explained it that way to my family and like, hey, I'll regret it if I don't do this. I don't know if this is a lifetime thing, but like definitely for the next couple of years. And they were pretty supportive. And I think now looking back on it, they're very proud of me. And I think the move to Charity Water is what then even put me on the radar to be discussed for a role on the Hillary campaign, which then led to, so many other things. And so, and through it all, my family has really appreciated, I think, a little bit more what can be done around like impacting the world for good and, helping to work on things that like improve our country and improve our communities. And that there's a lot more to like the narrow definition of careers than just the name brand company you work at and the salary that you make.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to tell you how much that resonates with me because I did not spend 10 years in a traditional sector, but graduated college, worked in finance, which is obviously considered like a legacy stable sector. But I was like, this is not what I'm passionate about. This is not what I want to do with my life. And so I decided to leave to go work at a media startup. And I really hear you on the dialogue front. My parents it took time, but as I communicated to them what my interests were, what my passion was, the sort of impact I wanted to have, they really bought in and were super supportive and proud of me, I think. So I hear that a ton.
Yeah. You got to spend that time having that conversation. Totally. And like, again, giving them the benefit of the doubt. Every decision I've ever made where I've been nervous, how my parents will like, I mean, that's so Indian of me, but like, like a grown woman and still worrying about how they'll like,
it's how we're conditioned.
But that's just the culture. Yeah, and the community that I grew up in. But every decision where I thought they would be nervous, they or like not accepting or, resistant to it, they haven't been. And I realized I wasn't giving them the benefit of the doubt. And when I took the time to sort of explain it, they'd be like, yeah, that sounds right. You seem confident. Okay, good luck. Like, how can we help you? So, I think we sometimes underestimate the flexibility and the like blue sky kind of thinking that our parents or community members do have. And it's about having that conversation to tap into that.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to also spend a little bit of time talking about your work on the Hillary campaign. I feel like when most people think about campaigns, they don't think about product. They think phone banking or grassroots organizing. And Obama is known for having pioneered the way in digital campaigning. I mean, what was it like for you to hold that role and kind of create something from scratch? Did you face any reluctance from some of the traditionalists?
Yeah, let me sort of explain the role of a tech team on a campaign and then talk a little bit about sort of how the tech team grew with the campaign and supported it. So first off, what is a tech team on a campaign? I agree with you. A lot of people don't immediately understand it. The tech team is like a supporting department within a bigger campaign. And at the end of the day, really a campaign, whether it's a presidential campaign or a local race, is like trying to do three things. You're trying to raise money, you're trying to get the message out about your candidate, and you're trying to mobilize voters to go out and vote on election day for your candidate. So it's called the 3 M's: message, money, mobilization. And now, I mean, definitely the Obama campaign championed this, but really, honestly, from like Howard Dean using social media, like you started seeing campaigns in the early 2000s really recognizing the power of like digital and tech to reach more supporters. Yeah, the candidate can go out and do rallies and whatnot, but that's still going to be a fraction of the electorate compared to who you can reach through video and through digital ads and through email and texting and things like that. And all of that requires technology to build the infrastructure to do that in a really like high resonating, well-designed, usable, pleasant way. And then to pull all of the data that's like received from all of that back into the campaign in order to like analyze and inform your strategy. So that's why a tech team is really in support of the broader goals of the campaign. So the tech team really focused on the technology that needed to be built in order to reach supporters to get our message out there about our candidate, to mobilize them, to get out the vote and to actually successfully vote, and to raise money to continue powering the campaign. And so when I joined the Hillary campaign, the tech team was very small. I think less than 10 people. I don't remember the exact number. I would guess, yeah, somewhere around like the less than 10 hire. And then by the end of the campaign, we were well over 90 people of like truly the best product managers, designers, engineers that you could ever work with. And, it was a devastating loss. And when you lose, you're not able to really like talk about the tactics and the technologies that you built. I totally understand that. I don't begrudge that. But it was an experience where even knowing the results now, if like somehow magically we went back in time and someone was like, do you want to join the Hillary campaign? I'd be like, hell yeah, like in a heartbeat would do the whole thing again. Because it was really where I sort of fell back in love with the craft of building product and how, it kind of like solidified some of the simpler principles of product development, how it really requires great collaboration. It actually requires fewer people than you would think. Some of the projects that I most enjoyed working on and felt were the most successful were the ones where it was just like the policy lead, the designer, and me kind of like hammering out what this thing should be and how it should come to life. And we achieved great velocity on the campaign. I think someone did the calculation and we basically launched a new application or service. Again, these technologies are getting out the vote, raising money, getting your message out there, contrasting the candidates, technologies to ensure that election integrity was maintained or help with the administration of the election, either the general election or the primaries leading up to it. So we ended up building, I think it was like of the 577 days the campaign was up and running, launched a new application or service into production every, I think the stat was like 10.5 days for like 19 months straight. Like that's the kind of velocity that like no rocket ship startup even achieves, much less a presidential campaign. So the volume and the intensity and the like single-minded focus of a campaign, it's very binary. You put your candidate in like the spot that they're seeking or you don't. I think kind of narrows out and like eliminates all the cruft that can sometimes plague other product teams. And so with that singular focus comes the ability to be super nimble and try different things. And so it was really an enjoyable experience. I learned a lot. Presidential campaign is like no joke. You work really hard for a really sustained amount of time. And I think there are a few experiences, professional experiences that really like show you what you're made of and where your limits are. And it was really eye-opening. I realized I was so much stronger than I thought, but also that, burnout is real and there are moments where you really need to rest. So it was an incredible experience and really opened my eyes to how, whether it's politics or even just like movement building and like progressive movement, organizations, that digital channels and smart tech can really help you achieve your goals better. Whether, you could write a long article about a particular policy that you're trying to put out in the world, or you could build, a New York Times-like or Vox-like interactive digital experience that's super well designed and usable to help bring that policy to life. And that the latter will be much more successful than the former. And so that was really fun to see and to do, and then has really helped me at my time at the ACLU.
Yeah, that's incredible. And it's so interesting to hear you talk about these different idiosyncratic experiences, because it seems like from Adobe to Water to the Hillary campaign, every single one of them has enabled you to better define your values as it relates to your career in some sort of specific way, which is what we're supposed to be figuring out when we go through life in different roles. Do you have any poignant memories that you shared with the former Secretary Clinton or just generally with the campaign team that you're going to carry with you for the rest of your life?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, she's incredible. She is someone I truly admire. I think about her like every day. I think really working to try and put the first woman in the White House, in the presidency, really lined up to my own sort of like interests and passions around like helping women advance. She's incredibly kind. She's really funny. I think there is decades of media and, political cruft out there that paint a very rigid portrait of who she is. And when you spend I mean, I only spent very little time interacting with her, but so many of her inner circle were part of the campaign. You really start to understand like a 360 view of who this real human is who has dedicated her entire life to helping people, and especially women and children. And I find her personal and professional choices really inspiring. It was an incredible time on the campaign. I think, a couple of memories that stick out. So one of my favorite projects was just a few of us worked on building this interactive calculator to help visualize her college affordability plan. And it was a really, I mean, as is Hillary Clinton, whether it's a criticism or not, she has really like in-depth, nuanced policies that can be really hard to explain with words, but really cover a variety of different use cases. And so she had this college affordability plan that really thoughtfully figured out how to help people alleviate debt, whether you were a 17-year-old starting college, whether you were an adult deciding to go back to college, whether you were someone who already had college debt and were looking to sort of figure out how to lessen that to allow you to pursue more in your life, so on and so forth. So it was a really complex policy that we really needed the general public to understand, press to understand. And so we built this really cool interactive college calculator to highlight that. And it was super well designed. It was really fun to work on. It was basically me, the designer, and then one of the heads of her policy team who like really helped craft this policy with Secretary Clinton. And it was a super, super fun, really like well built user experience to do that. And I later learned that she said it was one of the favorite things that the tech team had built for her. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. It was one of the most fun things that I've ever worked on, not only on the campaign, but in my career. So for her to also really enjoy it was like really awesome. And I met her a couple times, and my mom actually became a citizen during the 2016 campaign so that she could vote in that election, because she like really wanted to vote for Hillary Clinton, and she really wanted to like show her support for me working on that campaign. And I remember telling that story to Secretary Clinton, and she was like, that's so amazing. Like, tell your mom, thank you. And then she was like, I hope your mom's okay, that you haven't like probably gone home in a long time and have just been working so hard on this. And I was like, yeah, she understands it. It's okay. And then a couple weeks later, my parents got in the mail a letter from her, like personally signed, sort of thanking my mom for becoming a recent citizen.
Wow.
And telling her how proud she was that I was working on the campaign. Like, I mean, these are all memories that really stay with me. I met my now husband on the campaign. It was like an incredible experience, not only professionally, but personally as well. So many of my closest friends are friends who worked on the campaign, and we're kind of like jokingly refer to ourselves as like foxhole buddies, because it's a really intense period. I was on the campaign for almost 20 months straight. So you really develop a lot of deep ties with people that just doesn't go away very quickly.
Wow. It seems like it had a really profound impact on your life. And with anecdotes like this one, it's not surprising to understand why. I mean, she's obviously an incredible and iconic figure. No matter how you feel about her, I think that's just true. So obviously, having worked on the campaign, I'm sure it shaped a lot of your views on the current one that we just lived. And now it is technically over, but I'm curious, especially given the fact that this campaign was one that was largely run virtually and leaned a lot on digital efforts. What are your thoughts? Did you have any misgivings about that fact? I'm curious to hear it from your product perspective, especially now that you're at the ACLU.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what a wild year this has been, a wild presidential race. I mean, really, the pandemic changed everything from the course of the primary to the way a general was actually conducted. And what a time period for digital to really shine. And I know many members of the Biden digital team. I'm so proud of them. What an amazing victory. Because yeah, in-person rallies off the table, canvassing on the streets to raise money for your candidate off the table. It's like you had to really rethink so many fundamental strategies that have been inherited presidential campaign after presidential campaign, and rethink it to work in a world where people are, sheltering in place, don't want to be in large crowds, are very nervous about the economy and the future of the country. It was what like you had to be really creative digitally. And I think the Biden campaign absolutely figured out a way to do that in a way that's so amazing. my vantage point into the election was more from the ACLU's perspective. So the ACLU is a 100-year-old nonprofit, multi-issue organization. We basically work both legally and politically to protect the civil rights and civil liberties afforded to us in this country. And those civil rights and civil liberties have been really impugned upon the last 4 years of the Trump administration. So we have been filing, a few months ago, we hit 400 legal actions against the Trump campaign, just trying to push back on his infringement on voting rights and immigrants' rights and LGBTQ rights and reproductive rights and privacy and criminal justice and so much stuff. The ACLU also plays a very big role in the election in that we filed so many of the voting rights cases, especially as things started moving towards being able to protect the ability to vote by mail. And so I'm really proud. So we built a lot of really custom technology and did a lot of digital campaigns to help people understand, especially over the summer and coming into the fall, based on what state they live, what were their options to vote in person or to vote by mail so that they could make more informed choices as the pandemic was raging around them. And then the ACLU also plays a pretty significant role in election administration, election integrity. So, watching for things that could happen where, say, polling locations were shutting down early, or people were asking for ID when it's not needed, or maybe there's acts of intimidation at polling locations. So it was really incredible to be at the ACLU and be part of the team that beefed up so many, we literally wrote out scenarios for what could happen with this election and had on hand legal, political, comms, digital tech experts that could then respond to all those scenarios. So yeah, I've been sort of sweating this election for quite some time as we kind of geared up for it. And, I actually think it's kind of playing out the way we sort of expected, which is that it would be pretty clear that on election night, there were still a lot of ballots left to be counted. Our mantra is, count every vote. You have to count every ballot, and that takes time. And that as the days passed, it would be clear what the true vote count was, and then you could get ready to sort of call the election. And I think what's happening now with invalid, just fraudulent sort of claims of voter fraud is really a shame. But I do believe that that won't be successful, and that, we will be inaugurating Joe Biden. Will be electing him to the Electoral College. It's all going to proceed. It's just unfortunate that this FUD exists and that pushback against that is so limited, but it's noise. It's the act of someone who is, desperate to try and stay in power, but voters have spoken and Joe Biden had a pretty decisive victory. And I'm pretty pumped about that.
Yeah, so am I. Absolutely. And speaking to your work at the ACLU, again, it seems like it serves at the nexus of a lot of your previous experiences, and that being the organization that it is, it's meant to be very inclusive and protective of individual identities and civil freedoms. How have you thought about that in the context of your role being a South Asian woman?
Yeah. What's so amazing about the ACLU is in fighting to protect the rights of so many different communities, you need to sort of have those voices within the organization in order to really deeply understand, connect with, and fight to protect the voices and rights of trans people in America, immigrants who are trying to live in this country and to survive and live a better life, women who are trying to access reproductive care. So it is an incredibly diverse and inclusive community. And that's really amazing. And I learn stuff every single day. We have the representation of the people we're trying to protect exists in high numbers within our own ranks. And I think that's so important. That's a lesson I actually learned on the campaign, where representation on the campaign really mimicked representation of the country. The Hillary campaign was I forget the exact stats, but from campaign leadership through to individual departments like the tech team, we had our product management team on the tech team was 50% women. It was the first time in my entire career I'd ever worked for a female CTO or chief product officer. We had from senior leadership, 40% were people of color. The campaign staff were immigrants, people who identified as LGBTQ, came from different economic backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, so on and so forth. So that representation meant that we could connect with the country as we try to convince them to vote for Hillary Clinton. I see the same thing at the ACLU as we try to protect the rights of so many different communities. by having those communities represented inside the organization, we're more successful at that. And I feel that as a woman, I feel that as the child of immigrants, I feel that as someone who's South Asian. It's really incredible.
That's great to hear because it sounds, kind of like the common platitude, practice what you preach, that the organization is built and reflective of the work that you're doing. I'm curious, in that vein, being a South Asian woman in tech, if you have any anecdotes or memories that really just stick with you as it pertains to your identity in this world.
It is a industry, especially in the private sector in California and the Bay Area, where South Asians are pretty well represented, which is amazing. I'm trying to think anything specific as South Asian. I don't know. I mean, I remember I once at Adobe, we had like a partner meeting, pretty high level. We were trying to kind of hammer out like a business development arrangement in sort of the like multi-million-dollar level that would kind of bind two different companies together in sort of this like business development project that, would benefit our customers at Adobe and this other company's customers, a big, well-known company. It was a meeting that we were preparing for a long time to sort of negotiate the ins and outs of this deal. It was one of my first business development projects at that scale that I worked on. So I was really in it and learning a lot and excited by it. And we flew up to Seattle to take the meeting. And I walk into the room and like my dad's friend is the like lead of the other guy. Like he's like an uncle. He's like a family friend, someone who's known me since I was a child. And it was just so like this mix of like, okay, professional life and actual personal life. And it was fine. We were like, oh, we actually know each other. And he was like, I remember when she was this big. And I was like, oh God. I'm like trying to be like an adult, but like this like person, uncle knew me and my family so well. But it was totally fine. And it was actually like a really tender moment and eventually switched to like what needed to be talked about and fun. But yeah, there's like just these random kind of connections that happen just by virtue of, the South Asian community being so intertwined. Yeah, I don't know. That's sort of the thing that came to mind.
No, that's amazing. It's funny because, I speak to people and the trailblazers that we bring in on this podcast. It's very eclectic. And it's interesting, though, because in tech, we are generally much better represented than in a lot of other spaces. And it's exciting to kind of hear that this is one space in which we've started to really leave our mark and climb the ladder and serve in the leadership of organizations and build out our own community within it. Because I think that bodes well for the other spaces that we're all starting to tackle and be a part of.
Yeah. And I have to say from like my first steps into kind of like the progressive world to now, South Asians are also becoming more and more represented cycle after cycle in like political campaigns and political efforts and progressive movements in general. And that's like so cool. And, now we have a vice president elect who is half Indian, like how, amazing is that? So I do think that South Asians are expanding beyond sort of the traditional industries that you associate with them. And that's awesome to see. And I know it will continue. I was going to say, I hope it continues. I know it will continue.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to see, where else we see trailblazers kind of like push forward what's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about your time at Kickstarter and then also Wherewithal. Would love to hear a little bit about those experiences and kind of what led you down those paths.
Sure. After the campaign, like I said earlier, the loss was devastating. Like you kind of can't work on a campaign and work that hard and like believe so much in what you're doing and like really truly, or okay, maybe I shouldn't say, okay, for me personally, I felt like I couldn't give what I was giving and really consider that we would lose. Like I definitely thought about it and we all knew it was going to be a tough campaign and he's a formidable opponent and that there were, like a lot it was not going to be a slam dunk. And when we lost, I was devastated and it was like really hard. It's not only processing the loss. I think the whole country and the whole world was pretty shocked by it, but also it is then like 2 years of sort of like marathon level working. And so you're just physically, mentally, and emotionally exhausted. So I took some time to just sort of gather my thoughts. I actually went to India for a little bit to kind of unplug and be with my family out there. And it was just so, night and day from the world I was in and just start recuperating and then did some more travel And then by the time I came back, I'd kind of gotten my sea legs back, and the Kickstarter team reached out. I took that sort of knowing it wasn't going to be a forever thing, but it was very much like, they wanted someone to come in and run product and design at Kickstarter and sort of help them unstick themselves on a few different efforts and bring in some new blood and new ways of working in order to really think about how to like innovate and grow such a legendary crowdfunding platform. And at that point, there were other players in that industry, right? You had Patreon coming along that was really rethinking the way that creators could make a living on their platform. The expectations were sort of changing for creators. And so let's kind of think about how to innovate and whatnot. So I sort of took that kind of knowing it would be like maybe a year and a half to just to sort of help get them pointed in the right direction and then kind of figure out what the next right thing was. It was a really interesting experience where I like learned a lot. Ended up being there about a year and then went on to do some consulting and advising of companies. So that's when my friend Laura Hogan and I started Wherewithal. Again, I was just sort of like kind of wanting to help companies and sort of new in the process of like advising startups or advising organizations. I would find the one that really like stayed with me and then likely transition into a full-time role. So actually the ACLU is one of my first clients that when we started Wherewithal, which was like a company basically dedicated to like helping you level up your product velocity, your team health and leadership savviness and things like that. And the ACLU reached out. This was post 2016 and they were seeing a huge influx of new supporters, money, and were being asked to do a lot more digitally in order to respond to Trump and needed some like guidance. So I started advising the ACLU in addition to a variety of different startups and growth stage tech companies. And over time found that of my Wherewithal clients, the ACLU work was the work I like cared the most about, found the most interesting. I liked them, they liked me, and eventually they were like, why don't you join us full time? And it took me a little bit of time to sort of figure out whether that was like the right thing to do, but eventually it became clear that that's what I wanted to do, help them figure out the next 100 years.
Yeah, that's an exciting prospect, I'm sure. So obviously through all these organizations and experiences that you've had the opportunity to impact a variety of different sectors and spaces and see multiple different kinds of business models. If someone were to ask you to distill the impact that you think product can have, what would you say?
Yeah, I think the trends in my career, basically, I really like working on platforms with big reach. Charity Water, Adobe was helping the entire creative class be more creative. And every single thing you interact with in life has some touch point to an Adobe product, like the menu you pick up at a restaurant, the special effects you see in a movie. That kind of reach I find really compelling. Charity Water, especially the Hillary campaign, like reaching the entire country to get them to understand and get excited about your candidate, or reaching the entire world to help them understand that the clean water crisis is solvable in our lifetime. Kickstarter, a platform with incredible reach to help anyone who has a creative idea, help it come to life. So I think to me, the experiences and the product families that I've worked on that I enjoy the most are the ones where you're building something sort of like democratic with like a platform with broad reach so that value that you add into that platform is value that can be leveraged by millions of people. And I think that's the kind of product development that I really like the most.
Yeah, it seems like you found a beautiful niche that also has impact and demonstrates the impact that product can have. So it makes a ton of sense. Speaking again to all these experiences that you've had, you've obviously been a trailblazer and leader in the space of product. I'm curious, through this podcast, you're speaking to young South Asians and early career South Asians a lot of the time. With respect to them, what advice do you have for those who are interested in carving the sort of path you have in terms of figuring out the different opportunities that are out there and finding their way to a space that isn't talked about or fully understood?
Yeah, it's definitely possible. It's interesting and challenging. I think South Asian or not, like anyone I talk to who's sort of like trying to figure out the steps of their career, it's important to kind of figure out like, what do you want to do? And sometimes that's a really hard question to ask and answer. And I find it easier to actually more come at it from the place of what do I not want to do? And that has been really helpful for me to figure out not only the industries that I want to work in, but the environments and the team sizes and the types of people I want to work with. And so sometimes if the question of like, what do you want to do is too overwhelming, start whittling away an answer to that question by thinking about what do you not want to do? What do you not want to be working on? What do you not want to be focusing on? And that can sort of then, by like the process of elimination, help you sort of highlight the path to what you do want to be working on. So that's a little bit of advice, I guess.
Absolutely. That's great advice. Deepa, I just want to say thank you so much again for joining me on the podcast today. As I said before and multiple times throughout our conversation today, this is a nebulous but growing field and people want to understand more about it. And having leaders and trailblazers like you to look up to, I think is going to ease the path for many future generations who are coming along. So thank you so much for sharing your story and your path to this world. Really excited to have our listeners tune in.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. This is a great platform and podcast. So it was my pleasure.
This is a podcast from Trailblazers Media. For more content on South Asian trailblazing, follow us at South Asian Trailblazers on Instagram and Facebook.